Kalen Dravith had not slept in 3 days. He stood at the tall window of his war room, looking out at the dark mountains that surrounded his kingdom. The fires of his soldiers' camps burned like orange stars in the valley below. His kingdom, Ashvale, was the strongest werewolf territory on the continent. Every pack leader feared his name. Every enemy thought twice before crossing his borders. But tonight, someone had crossed him from the inside. "The files are gone," said General Moores, his second in command, placing a report on the stone table behind him. "Troop positions, supply routes, the location of the northern outpost. All of it, taken." Galen did not turn around. "And the source?" Moores hesitated for just a moment. That single pause told Kalen everything he needed to know about what was coming next. "Sarah Voss," Moore said. "A guard saw her near the war room the night the files disappeared. Her scent was found on the door handle. 2 witnesses have confirmed it." Kalen finally turned. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and right now, they carried all the weight of one. Sarah Voss, his mate. A quiet, soft-spoken she-wolf who had never asked for rank or reward, who brought him tea on cold mornings without being asked, who read books in the corner of his library and never demanded his attention. He had trusted her more than anyone in this palace, perhaps more than anyone in his life. "Find her," he said. His voice was low and completely steady. "Bring her to me." By the time his soldiers reached her quarters, Sarah was already gone. Her room was neat. Her bed was made. She had taken nothing with her, no coin, no weapons, no extra clothing, just herself and whatever she carried in her mind. The head tracker, a seasoned wolf named Dane, stood in the doorway of her empty room, with a strange look on his face. "Most traitors take something when they run," Dane said quietly. "She is clever," Kalen replied, pulling his coat on. "She knew we would look. Start at the northern gate. She would head for the Thornwood." He was right. The chase lasted 3 nights. The Thornwood was a brutal forest, dense, cold, full of ravines and river crossings that could swallow a man in the dark. His soldiers were some of the finest trackers in the land, but Sarah moved through the trees like she had grown up in them. She left almost no trace. She chose paths that covered her scent, and doubled back twice in ways that confused even his most experienced men. But Kalen followed the mate bond. It pulled at the center of his chest like a thread attached to something far away. He hated that he could feel it. He hated that even now, hunting her through the rain and the dark, some part of him was simply grateful she was still alive. On the 3rd night, they found her. She was standing in the ruins of an old stone watchtower near the northern border. The walls had crumbled long ago, leaving only the base and half of one side still standing. Rain fell steadily through the open roof. Sarah stood in the middle of it, with her hands open at her sides, completely still, her dark hair soaked and pressed flat against her neck. She did not run when she heard them coming. She did not fight when his soldiers surrounded her. She looked directly at Kalen as he stepped through the broken doorway, and her expression was not what he expected. There was no fear in her face, no guilt, only a kind of exhaustion that went very deep, the kind that comes not from running, but from carrying something heavy for a very long time. "You found me," she said. "That is going to cost us both." Kalen looked at her for a long moment. The rain fell between them. "Bind her," he said. "We go back to Ashvale." The trial was held in the Great Hall 3 days later. The room was full. Council members, generals, senior pack members, everyone who mattered in Ashvale had come to watch the Alpha King's mate answer for what she had done. There was a particular kind of silence in a room full of people waiting for a verdict they already believe they know. The charges were read aloud. Every detail of the evidence was placed before the council. The guard's testimony, the witness accounts, the trail of her scent, the fact that she had fled before anyone came to question her. When the council finished, the head elder looked at Sarah and said, "You may speak in your defense." Sarah looked at him calmly. She said nothing. The room broke apart with noise. Council members exchanged sharp looks. Someone at the back of the hall said something about guilt being obvious. General Moores, seated to Kalen's right, shook his head slowly, as if confirming something he had always suspected. Kalen sat at the head of the long table and watched her. He had seen guilty people stand in that hall before. He had watched men crumble, make excuses, cry, argue, blame others. Guilt had a particular shape. It was always moving, always searching for a crack in the wall to squeeze through. Sarah was not moving. She was not searching. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the table in front of her, and she was so completely still that it felt like something else entirely. It felt like a choice. The council voted. The punishment was exile, stripped of her place in the pack, removed from the bond's formal recognition, sent out beyond the borders alone. It was the oldest punishment for someone who had betrayed their king. The seal and the signature were all that remained. Kalen picked up the pen. He held it over the document for a moment. Then he set it down. "We continue tomorrow," he said, and left the room before anyone could respond. That night, he sat alone in his study and asked his intelligence captain a single question. What targets did the Hollow strike after the files were taken? The captain blinked. It was not the question he had expected. "None, my king," he said slowly. "The information was taken nearly 2 months ago. By now, every location in those files should have been hit. But the Hollow has not moved against any of them." Kalen leaned back in his chair. Not one. Not one. The room was very quiet. A traitor steals information and hands it to the enemy. The enemy uses that information. That is how it works. That is the only reason information has value to someone who steals it. If the Hollow had received genuine intelligence about the positions of his troops and the location of his most critical northern outpost, they would have moved within days. They had not moved in 2 months. Kalen stood up and walked to the window. Something was wrong with the entire picture. He had been so certain, so blinded by the evidence in front of him, that he had never stopped to ask the most important question. What had actually happened as a result of the leak? The answer was nothing. And nothing, he was beginning to understand, was not the result of a successful betrayal. It was the result of a successful deception. He spent the next 4 days pulling threads. He went back to the original files. He found that the information they contained, troop movements, supply lines, the northern outpost location, had been slightly altered. The positions were wrong by just enough to be dangerous to anyone acting on them. The supply routes led to dead ends. The outpost coordinates placed the location in an empty valley 300 miles from where it actually stood. The files had been falsified before they were taken. Whoever had staged the theft had wanted those false files to reach the Hollow. They had used the appearance of a leak to deliver poisoned information directly into enemy hands. The Hollow's entire northern assault had been redirected away from the real targets and into empty land. His northern border was still standing because of it. Kalen sat with this for a long time. Then he began looking at who else had access to the war room that night. Not just Sarah. Everyone. He pulled records, cross-referenced timings, and looked at patterns across the previous 4 months. Not just this single incident, but everything leading up to it. On the 6th day, the pattern became clear. There was a real source feeding the Hollow live information. Someone with access to the highest levels of Ashvale's military planning. Someone who had been selling intelligence for over a year, carefully and quietly, in small pieces that were hard to trace. Someone who had been trusted completely. The trail led, slowly and undeniably, to General Moore's. Kalen went to Sarah's cell himself that night. He sent the guards away and stood outside the iron door for a moment, with his hand resting on the lock. Inside, he could hear nothing. She had always been quiet. He opened the door. She was sitting against the far wall with her knees pulled up, her wrists still marked from the binding cuffs. She looked up when he entered, and she read his face the way she had always been able to read him, faster and more accurately than anyone else ever had. "You figured it out," she said. It was not a question. He stepped into the cell and crouched in front of her, so that they were at the same level. This was not a conversation he was willing to have while standing above her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Because you would have stopped me. You would have moved immediately, removed everyone from the war room, changed all the information channels, started a formal investigation. The mole would have felt the pressure and disappeared underground. I would have lost the only window I had." "You knew about Morse." I suspected him for 3 months. I had a contact outside the palace who helped me confirm it. But suspicion is not proof, and bringing suspicion about your most trusted general to a king who does not like uncertainty, she paused. I chose a different way. You let me think you were a traitor. I let you react to me as if I were one, she said. Because your reaction had to be real. Morse was watching everything. If you had any doubt about my guilt, if you had hesitated even slightly, he would have known something was wrong. I needed you to be completely certain so that he would feel completely safe. Kalen was quiet for a long time. He thought about the rain, the 3 days of hunting her through the thornwood, the trial, the pen he had held over the exile document, and then set down for reasons he had not fully understood at the time. You used my anger, he said finally. I used your anger, she agreed, because it was the most honest and convincing thing in this entire kingdom. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he reached forward and unlocked the cuffs from her wrists himself, setting them carefully on the stone floor beside him. She stood slowly. He stood with her. He stepped aside to let her walk out first, and then he followed her out of the cell and into the corridor, and neither of them said anything for a while, because there was too much to say, and they were both, in their own ways, too tired to begin. The real trial happened 4 days later. General Moores stood in the same great hall where Sarah had stood in silence, and he did not stand quietly. He argued, blamed, denied, and then, when the evidence was placed in front of him piece by piece, he went very still, in a way that was nothing like Sarah's stillness. His stillness was the stillness of a man with nowhere left to go. He was stripped of his rank, removed from the pack bond, and exiled before the sun went down. The truth about Sarah spread through Ashvale, the way real truth always spreads, not through formal announcements or proclamations, but through people telling each other in hallways and kitchens and courtyards. The guard who had testified against her came to Kalen privately and admitted that he had been told what to say and by whom. The witnesses recanted. The picture shifted completely. Sarah did not make a speech. She did not demand recognition or apology or celebration. She went back to the library, found the book she had been reading before everything started, and picked up from the page she had marked. Kalen found her there that evening. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the way he had stood outside her cell, with his hand resting on the frame, and a question he was not entirely sure how to ask. She did not look up from her book immediately. She let him stand there for a few seconds, which he suspected was on purpose. Then she looked up. The northern border is holding, he said. The Hollow's assault force has retreated. Without accurate intelligence, and without Morse feeding them updates, they have no useful information about our positions. Good, she said. 4 months, he said. You ran that operation alone for 4 months. No support, no resources, no one who knew what you were doing. I had my contact outside the palace. One person. She looked at him evenly. One person was enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled the chair across from her, away from the table, and sat down, which surprised her. He could tell by the small shift in her expression, there and gone quickly. I have been the kind of king, he said carefully, that people work around rather than with. I am aware of this. I have considered it a feature. It meant that everyone beneath me moved carefully and made few mistakes. It also meant, Sarah said, that when someone found a genuine threat to your kingdom, they could not simply come and tell you. Yes, he said. I am aware of that too. She studied him. Is this the part where you apologize? I am not very good at apologies. I know. I wasn't expecting one. I am better, he said, at making changes. He rested his hands flat on the table between them. I want to know things, directly, without ceremony or delay. I want someone at this table who will tell me what is actually happening, not what they believe I want to hear. He paused. I would like that person to be you. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering him. This proud, difficult, iron-willed man who had chased her through the rain and was now sitting across from her in a library, asking if she wanted a place at his table. I want the whole table, she said. Something shifted in his expression. It was not quite a smile. He did not smile easily, but it was close enough. "That is a significant request," he said. "You almost exiled me for saving your kingdom," she replied. "I think I have earned it." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the kind of nod that meant something real, not a courtesy or a gesture, but an actual decision made and settled. Outside, the night was cold and clear. The fires in the valley below burned steadily. The mountains that had watched over Ashvale for centuries stood where they had always stood, unmoved. And inside the library, the Alpha King and his mate sat across from each other, as equals for the first time, with a great deal of work ahead of them, and, for the first time in a long while, someone they could each trust to do it with.